All right, so for our last lesson of this week, then we're going to review multiplying decimals, and then we'll start next week with our two different ways that we divide decimals, and then we'll move forward into fractions. So in multiplication of decimals, in the same way, anytime we have decimals or fractions, we ask questions. So at the top of your paper, you're going to see the questions, just to remind you what we do and how we do it. The first thing, what's my first thing that I do? First, and then I have a second thing that I have to count. Then I have to move something. Well, moving something is decimals, and I have to know how I move it. So what do I do first? I simply multiply. I multiply my numbers. With addition and subtraction, I line up my decimals, bring it down, fill in with zeros, then I can add. On multiplication, I multiply first, and then we work with our decimals. My second thing is I want to count my decimal spaces. Once again, not my decimal points, my decimal spaces. How many decimal spaces are behind each of the decimals together in my multiplication problem. Then, once I know my decimal spaces, then I move my decimal down below in my answer from right to left, however many times. If there are 2 decimal spaces, I move it twice. If there are 5 decimal spaces, I move it 5 times. So the example that comes with the book then, they start out with 32.05 multiplied by 7.4. So 32 and 500ths. Multiplied by 7 and 4/10. Now, the book, if you remember, at the very beginning of the year also talked about estimating, and we had to do some rounding and things before we did the math. That doubled the work. I'm not worried about that. I don't want you to estimate. I don't want you to have double the work. I just want you to know how to multiply your decimals. So all we're going to do is ignore the estimating part, and we're just going to do the multiplication itself. Just remember that when you're multiplying, then you get your answer. Down here, you count your decimal spaces. There are 2 decimal spaces in the top, 1 at the bottom, so I have to move it 3 times. Move it in what direction? Always from right to left. However many times it tells us to, 3 different times. Now, as we're multiplying, when I have zeros at the end, just like with the addition or subtraction, unless it's money, I drop those zeros off. It can't be counted correct because it's not a proper number. So I have to make sure I eliminate those zeros. Another thing to remember is anytime I'm going from my first number that I'm multiplying, I go to my second, we have that saying to remember to bring down zeros and hold place value. My second number tells me to bring down a 0. If I have a third one, then my third number tells me to bring down 2 zeros, and we just keep going. Hold those zeros. If we don't hold the zeros, what happens? We often just line everything up to the far right, and then everything's off when we do the addition part. What I mean by that, I'm going to be showing you on every one of these. So we're going to do 3 of these, and then we're going to do 2 of the order of operations. I only have 5 practice problems to do with you. So I have 8 and 6/10 times 4 and 1/10. I always start with the 1. So I have to multiply with my 1, basic multiplication. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 8 is 8. I always start with multiplying first. Then, once I've done that, I can go to step 2 by counting my decimal spaces. So 1 times 6 is 6, 1 times 8 is 8. Now, what I was just telling you on my second number tells me to bring down a 0. That's going to hold that place value so I know everything's lined up correctly. Then I can multiply with my 4. Well, 4 times 6 is 24, so I have to carry my 2 and write down my 4. 4 times 8 is 32 plus 2 is 34. When I have everything lined up then, I know I'm adding because it's a multiplication problem, but these then I have to add 6 and 0, 8 and 4. I'd have a 1 carried over, 4 and 1 and 3. So I have 3, 5, 2, 6, but not my answer because I have to count decimal spaces. 2 decimal spaces. Moving in what direction? From right to left 2 times. Put my decimal where it belongs. I end up with 35 and 26/100ths as my answer on my answer line. Now, multiplication in number sentences, I can put them in any order. Okay, so this one has 3 digits, this one has 3 digits. The only time that I switch them around when it's multiplication is if there's more digits in one number. So I could have a smaller value. This could go out for 4 decimal positions. I usually put that on top because it has more digits when I'm multiplying. but you don't have to. So you write out your multiplication problem. So I have 12 and 8/10 times 2 and 21 hundredths. And then I do my multiplication. Do step 1 before I do 2 and 3. I multiply by 1. Once again, basic multiplication. 1 times 8 is 8. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Now I go to my second number. My second number tells me to bring down a 0. Hold that place value so we don't forget. Then I can multiply by my 2. 2 times 8 is 16. Put down my 6 and carry my 1. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. And 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so we got the second one. Now I have a third one. The same, once again, is the same, so I know to bring down 2 zeros. My third number tells me 2, and I circle both of them. Bring down 2 zeros, so I don't get confused as to where my answers are lining up once I'm multiplying. And then when I multiply by the 2, I end up with the same numbers as I had on the previous level. So 2 times 6, or 2 times 8 is 16. Carry my 1. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1 is 5. And 2 times 1 is 2 again. The zeros being brought down lets me line everything up where they need to be, and then I can just add each of my columns. So I have 8, 6, 5, and 1 is 12, carry my 1, 5, 2, and 1 is 8, and 2. When I have that, then I can do step 2, counting my decimal spaces. How many decimal spaces are in my problem? Well, there's 1 on top and 2 on bottom. So there's a total of 1, 2, 3 decimal spaces, which means I have to move it 3 spaces from the right to the left, which is step 3. Once I do that, then I know my decimal has to be between this 8 and 2. So I have 28 and 288 10,000ths. No, excuse me, thousandths. So number 3, this one happens to be money. So I have to make sure that I end up with an answer that's in money form. Notice they give me my 2 decimal spaces up here. It's not down here. It doesn't have to be as I'm doing the math. I just have to make sure I have my 2 decimal spaces once I get to an answer. So I have 2 times 5, which is 10. Carry my 1. 2 times 6 is 12 plus 1 is 13. And then 2 times 8 is 16 plus 1 is 17. My second number tells me to bring down a 0, so I don't forget to hold that place value, and then I can multiply my 9s. When I multiply by 9s, then I know that I'm going to get 9 times 5 is 45, carry my 4, and then I'm going to multiply. So we line everything up where it goes so we don't get confused on the addition. Once again, if I skip this 0, what I often see still at this point of the year is people shift it over and it's lined up incorrectly and they get the wrong answer. Make sure we have it lined up and we write neatly so that when we're working on it, then I can have it. I have to shift it 3 times because there are 3 decimal spaces, 1 or 2 times because there are 2, no, there are 3 decimal spaces, yeah. So I shifted 3 times. Now, it's money and it's an extra 0 at the end. So I can only have 2 decimal spaces when it comes to money. If it wasn't money, I still wouldn't have that 0 at the end because it's not a proper number. So I'd have $79.58. The second step then is the order of operations. And as we talked on the adding and subtracting, the order of operations, we have to follow those steps correctly. If I don't, it completely changes my answer in the end. So I have asked for several extra presents, absolute value, square roots, exponents, parentheses is the only one that I've put into these problems. That some of them had exponents and things, and I just took those exponents out. I'm not ready to review that with you yet. From my dear, so I have to do multiplication and division first then, and Sally, and then addition and subtraction. Both of these have parentheses first. So in your assignment, you're going to have 4 problems like this, both of which you have to do, or all of which you have to do the parentheses first. So I have to start with subtraction on this problem. So I have to, in subtraction, put my first number on top. That is always the case. I have 21 and 400ths, and I want to subtract 18 and 7/10. So I have to remember yesterday's lesson, line them up according to the decimals, which I did, bring down my decimal, fill in with zeros. Then I can subtract. So when I subtract, I know I have to borrow. I have to borrow through because I can't get anything from the 0. So I have 4 minus 0, and then I'm going to have 10 minus 7, and then 0 minus 8. I've got to borrow from the 2 and make it a 1. So then I have a 10 take from the 8. When I do my subtraction, I have 4 minus 0, which is 4. The 10 minus the 7 is 3. Borrowing from the 2 once again to make it 10, and 10 minus 8 is 2. And then I have 1 and 1 stuck out there by itself. As I was grading the ones that were turned in for the addition and subtraction, I had some of you that did have like a 5 or 4 or 3 hanging out here, and then you dropped it off and left it. I have to check what's up here. 1 minus 1 does give me 0, so I don't need it on this one, but that's not always the case. So just make sure that if you have borrowed and you had an answer floating out here, you make sure to include it if it's needed. Then I can do my multiplication, which is reviewing today's lesson. So I line them up just to do multiplications first. It's not stacking according to decimals, that's only addition and subtraction. So I multiply with the 4, then the second number will tell me to bring down my 0. I'll multiply by the 3, then the third number will tell me to bring down 2 zeros, and I multiply by the 2. When I multiply by 4, 4 times 5 is 20, carry my 2, 4 times 9 is 36, plus 2, which is 38, carry my 3, 4 times 1 is 4 plus 3 is 7. Second number tells me 2. Bring down to 0. I hold my place value. Then I can multiply by my 3. I get 585. My third number tells me 2. Bring down 2 zeros. Then I can multiply by my 2. I get 390. Those allow me to line everything up where they can go so that when I add them, I'm going to get the same or the right answer. I have zeros. I have 8 and 5, which is 13, carry a 1. 8, 7, and 1 would be 16, carry a 1. 9, 1 is 10, plus 5 is 15, carry 1. 1 and 3 is 4. How many decimal spaces do I have in my problem? I only look back at this one. I have 1, 2, 3 decimal spaces. So I'm going to move 3 times from the right to left. Then I drop off my 0. Now, the only error that I've seen in dropping off the zeros in recent math is I have a couple of you that you dropped off the 0 and then moved the decimal. Well, we've got to make sure we move the decimal first, and then where my answer is, bring down the 0. Or some of you just don't drop it off, and then I can't give you credit for a proper number. So just make sure you move your decimals. I drop off any zeros at the end unless it's money. So my final answer should be 45 and 63 hundredths. So that leaves us with this one, which I would like you to do on your own, just to make sure that we're on the same page together and that you have it correct. So please pause the video, work it through, check your work, make sure you're right. And hopefully you have an answer and you've done as I've asked. So we're going to multiply first because in my order of operations, I have to do parentheses first. I would multiply 7 and 92 hundredths times 8 and 5 tenths. When I do that, then your work should look like this. Remember that on the second number, you brought down your 0. So you ended up with 67320. 3 decimal spaces told you to move it 3 times, which would give you 67.320, but you would mark off that 0 at the end. Then I would use that number and add it to 11.7. Now, just to show you that I don't have to switch the order because this one has larger numbers, I just kept the 11.7 in front. It's fine. You have to remember to line up the decimals. When you line up the decimals, fill in with zeros, drop your decimal down, then you should have gotten 79 and 200 as your final answer. That's the lesson. Remembering to multiply step by each of them, then count your decimal spaces, then move your decimal from right to left, however many times I need to according to my decimal spaces. If I can do all that correctly, show my work, then I should be fine on the assignment. If you have any questions, come and ask as you're working through it, but please show your work. I've had 3 of you that haven't done well in the last couple of assignments because you just don't show your work. Got to show your work. That's been the rule for the past 33, almost 34 weeks now.